standing here on the Brustleton Incline with that amazing view down into County Durham behind me, it's easy to imagine that day, the 27th of September 1825, the opening day of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, that marked the beginning of the modern railway age. What we want to do in this video is bring a part of that story to life with Jane Hackworth-Young, the great-great-granddaughter of Timothy Hackworth, the man whose name is forever associated with the town of Shildon, the first railway town. Jane is going to tell us a little bit about her family, and in particular about Timothy, whose knowledge and expertise brought people here from around the world as early as 1825. They came to find out from Timothy what was happening here, and he shared his knowledge and expertise freely and generously. They then went home to the places they came from, places like America and Prussia and France, to persuade people back there to do the same thing, to start building steam railways. Timothy began his working life as an apprentice to his blacksmith father at Wylam Colliery. He became involved with the S&DR project when he went to work as a borrowed man for George Stephenson at his engineering works at 4th Street in Newcastle. He may even have worked on locomotion number 1. He must have impressed Stephenson as he supervised the building of the stationary engines at both Brustleton and Netherley, and was appointed railway superintendent of the S&DR in 1825. He went on to design and build the first reliable engine for the line, the Royal George, before parting ways with the S&DR in 1840 and dying of typhus in 1850.
This is Timothy Hackworth's grave, who died on the 7th of July 1850, and Jane, his relict, which means his wife, who died on the 19th of August 1852. Young Timothy had a twin brother. They were born in February 1825, that momentous year. But the little brother Thomas died at 6 weeks, and their mother Jane was very, very ill. Timothy was very worried and wanted to get the family to Shildon, where he was appointed superintendent engineer in the May of that year.
New Shildon didn't really exist when the Stockton and Darlington Railway opened, so the company built cottages for their workers to live in. This terrace is the first one they built, and Timothy and his family lived here between 1826 and 1831. The cottages were close to the Mason's Arms pub, now the Cape to Cairo, and the Mason's Arms crossing. Recently, Big installed some sleeper stones and an information board over the road from the pub. Behind them, the tracks led to the Brustleton Incline, and the S&DR works were also located there. And this is the spot where locomotion number 1 was waiting for the wagons to be lowered from the Brustleton Incline on the 27th of September 1825, and the journey to Stockton via Darlington began.
As part of the contract for Timothy Hackworth, he was provided by the directors of Stockton Darlington Railway with a house, and this was the second house he was provided with in Shildon, and his family moved into it in 1831, and his youngest child, Jane, was born here. In 1833, he brought his brother down from Walbottle to help him to manage his own works. And that is why there are 2 doors to the house. On this side, Timothy Hackworth and his children lived, and on that side, Thomas, his wife, and his first 2 children. Timothy Hackworth set up his own works behind the house in 1833, and of course he was still superintendent engineer of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, so he brought his brother Thomas here to run the works for him. Timothy and Thomas built many locomotives in their works behind the house, but perhaps the most exciting was the locomotive for Russia. Timothy was too busy on the main railway, and Thomas had just got married. So the task of taking the locomotive to Russia and assembling it there was entrusted to Timothy Hackworth's eldest son, John Wesley Hackworth, who was only 16 years of age.
Hi, I'm Pam Porter and I work here at Locomotion in Shildon. We're really pleased to have the Friends of the Stockton Darlington Railway here today to do some filming for this documentary. Locomotion has now reopened to visitors, but we are on limited opening hours only at the moment. So the Friends are here on a day that we're actually closed to visitors. However, if you'd like to come and see us, you can book a free visit through our website locomotion.org.uk, so please check out the website for details.
Thanks, Pam. We're here so Jane can tell us a little bit about the famous story of Timothy Hackworth, the Sans Pareil and the Rainhill trials.
So Timothy Hackworth was building and rebuilding the locomotives on the Stockton and Darlington Railway. And in 1829 he decided to take part in a competition to find the best locomotive for the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. He was allowed by the directors of the S&DR to erect her at night in the workshops, and she was delivered to Rainhill, where the tests took part. A cylinder blew, but another one was found and placed on her, and although she was too heavy, she was very successful. But as we all know, Robert Stephenson's rocket won. The rocket did not go on for many years, but it was a plan, a sort of new concept of a locomotive which would go on. The Sans Pareil ran very successfully and was finally restored by John Hicks and given to the Science Museum.
We're now at Shildon's Railway Institute to find out about Timothy's interest in education and philanthropy.
Timothy Hackworth set up the first Railway Institute in 1833 in Shildon. He was very aware that many of his men could not read or write, and he wanted them to have every opportunity.
So initially it was about education. Over time, once that goal started to be met, it became a campaigning body. So the institute here in Shildon campaigned to bring a water supply to the town, because there wasn't a water supply here until 1868, which was after the institute's first building was built. It also campaigned to get gardens and allotments for workers, and it sought to provide opportunities as well that wouldn't normally have been open to a worker of the level of the kind of railway workers here. Excursions, lectures, talks, even events that they probably would never have had exposure to. When the temperance movement first came to Shildon, although Timothy Hackworth had founded the institute with a view also to keeping his men out of the taverns, the inns and the pubs, he wasn't for total abstinence from alcohol. And it's documented that, you know, quite often after a hard day's shift, he would lay a crate or two of ales on for his men. So when the temperance movement came, he actually spoke out against his workers signing the Temperance Pledge, which professed complete abstinence from alcohol. I think he was more just about moderation and a sensible outlook on it.
Timothy Hackworth did not let his children sign the pledge. The pledge was signed by many Methodists, and you signed the pledge and said that you would not drink alcohol again. In fact, in Shildon, it was rather necessary to drink alcohol, as the water was very contaminated and everyone drank small beer. He wasn't a killjoy. He encouraged his children to ride, and they listened to music. He was also very good to his men, and he also provided them with beer. One great thing he did for his workforce, which was a breakthrough at the time, was that he did not make them work 364 days a year. They got Sundays off, and perhaps he encouraged them to go to chapel, but they still had time to spend with their family. Timothy Hackworth practiced his religion in everyday life. He cared very much for his workmen and their families, and very often when men had died, and the bailiffs went in and took everything away from the widow, he would buy back their furniture and give it to the widow and the family. Timothy Hackworth believed in education not only for men but also for women. He ensured that all his daughters had a very good education. One became a governess and another set up a school for young ladies in Penrith. This was Prudence, who did so much to further the name of her father.
As we fly over the Brosselton incline, we can clearly see where the S&DR ran down into what became New Shildon. Jane's full name is Jane Hackworth-Young, so we've come back here to find out just a little bit about this side of the family.
Timothy Hackworth brought a lot of men down from the Tyne. Timothy was appointed superintendent engineer in May 1825, and he brought various families down to assist. Most of them were Methodists because they didn't drink, so they were safe workers. One of the families was the Young family, and Robert Young worked first at Etherley Colliery, and then 2 years later he came in 1827 to be the engineman here. The engine house is just along there, and that is where the stationary engine worked. He worked without taking a holiday for 20 years, and he died here in 1848. And although by that time the incline wasn't used so much, his brother Ralph took over from him. Robert Young's only son, George Edward Young, married Timothy Hackworth's youngest child, Jane Hackworth. And through the auspices of Timothy Hackworth, George Edward Young became a Methodist minister.
So Jane, Timothy's wife was called Jane. His youngest child, a little girl, was called Jane. And you're called Jane. Am I getting it right? Is Jane a family name?
Yes, I am the third Jane. Timothy Hackworth's daughter, Jane Hackworth, who became Jane Young, was living with my father in 1914 when she sadly died. Behind us is Robert Young's house, the engineman, and on the house you will see a plaque. These are the Stockton and Darlington Railway plaques, which were put on every house or terrace the Stockton and Darlington Railway owned and in which its employees lived. And it's been a great joy to me to research the original families who were on the Stockton and Darlington Railway in these houses. In fact, the plaques go from A on the coast to the extension of the Stockton and Darlington Railway right up beyond Waskerley to L. And it's been lovely to be able to do it.
It's easy to see why Timothy Hackworth is loved and remembered in Shildon. There's a statue of Timothy in the town square, and a primary school and the local park are all named after him. We regularly celebrate his achievements. But he's not just celebrated in Shildon. He is remembered in Baltimore in the USA. That city was represented on opening day, 27th of September 1825. So in 1826, Evan Thomas came to visit Timothy Hackworth from Baltimore and then went home to persuade people there to build a steam railway. They will be celebrating their 200th in 2027. In Washington, D.C., at the world-famous Smithsonian Museum, they recognise the S&DR as the place where the modern railway age began. And they want to work with us to mark the celebrations in 2025. Shildon and Timothy's story have yet to be fully told, but Locomotion is planning to tell that story more fully in the new shed that is being built in time for 2025. And they're investing large sums in renovating the heritage end of the site, hence the scaffolding currently on Timothy's house. We all look forward to the next chapter being told.